Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Kyra and I'm a recovering beauty guru. For the last 6 years, I bought anything and everything I wanted in the beauty category, and now I'm just trying to rein myself in by using what I have, tracking what I have, as well as changing the mindset, which of course is the most important part. And one of the ways I do that, and one of the ways that I keep makeup fun, is by sharing with you guys roundups of products as well as project panning. And while I don't have a Pan That palette for the year of 2024, if I did, these would be the 5 palettes that I would choose among, and they're all for different reasons. I also wanted to say that this video was inspired by Alejandra Lisette, or Alex, here on YouTube. She and her video, of course, will be linked down below in the description box. I highly recommend you go check out her video and see what her reasoning was behind her different palettes that she thought she might use for 2024. Neither one of us, I don't think, have any plans for a Pan That palette this year, and let's just go ahead and talk about why. So the main reason why I don't have a Pan That palette for 2024 is that it just doesn't jive with my overarching goal for my eyeshadow palette collection, which is to touch every eyeshadow that I own this year through the No Pan Left Behind series, as well as hit a few new pans, whether organically in my No Pan Left Behind, as I have done already twice, or in my Project Level Up, where I am working on touching every shade as well as hitting a few new pans this year. And then from there, I plan to declutter the palettes that I found really difficult to reach for, that I just wasn't interested in, or that had some reason or another that I just didn't want to reach for it, as well as products that just aren't bringing me joy anymore. Makeup is supposed to be fun, and for me, while I like to use things up and I like to have focus when it comes to using my products, at the same time, I'm not here to punish myself for having too much makeup, and I just want to make the best use out of all of my makeup that I can, at least this year. So I'm not saying I would never do a Pan That palette, and I love watching Pan That palette videos, and I have done Pan That palettes in the past, multiple in fact, and some I was very successful and some I wasn't. The other reason is because at this point I am a laser focused project panner when it comes to those products that I am panning. I am doing things behind the scenes that are causing me to use other makeup besides just the products that are in projects. I'm pretty focused on my project panning. And if I had a Pan That palette, I would become laser focused on that palette, and I would neglect the rest of my eyeshadows on some level this year. And again, that goes against what my overall goal is. And finally, like I said, I've done Pan That palettes before. Some I was pretty successful in my eyes, and some not as much. If you'd like to see some of my former Pan That palettes or hear about that in another video, let me know down below, because I'd be happy to film that as well. You will see some of those things in an upcoming video where I plan to share every pan in my collection. Beyond that, I just haven't been overly successful with Pan That palette in the past in terms of hitting every pan in a palette, using any shadows up at all. I don't think I've ever used an entire eyeshadow up personally. So because of that, I find it hard to want to put the energy, the time, and the usage into one palette when I know it will cause me to neglect the rest of my palettes. So all of that aside, if I was going to pick a Pan That palette for this year, I'm going to tell you the 5 palettes that I would be choosing between, and maybe you can leave down in the comments below which palette you think I should, hypothetically, choose for a Pan That palette, just for fun, and why. So for every palette, I had obviously some pros, some reasons why it would make a good Pan That palette for me, and then for each one of them I made sure to also include a con, a reason why it might not be the best choice for a Pan That palette for me, hypothetically. The first palette did make an appearance in those 5 palettes that I would keep if I could only keep 5, and that is my Natasha Denona Glam palette. I've had this since its launch. The reason I chose this palette is because it's not only capable of glam, as the name of the palette would indicate, but it's also great for me for everyday looks. You have your staple mattes in here, which are very helpful for setting up any kind of look, whether dramatic or everyday. And then you have a myriad of other lid shades, deepening shades, smoky shades. You have pink, you have champagne, you have some silver, you have a gold. Also, I have dips in some of these shades. At least, you know, it's like not brand new anyways. I have gotten a lot of use out of this palette and I will not part with it. And also, this is really easy to pair with other palettes, whether you're incorporating other mattes from another palette or you want to use this to set up your look and incorporate a shimmer from another palette. I think this would pair with other palettes really easily and really beautifully and help keep me interested in this palette throughout the year. However, I did say the one con for this is I wonder if I might get bored with it, because even if I did incorporate other palettes with this, I mean, I could see doing colorful shades with the mattes as a setup in the crease with this palette, but I don't know that I would get a lot of use out of any colorful mattes that I might have in other projects or that I just want to use for fun one day. And honestly, I had to really scrape the barrel to come up with that one con. And like I said, I don't know that I would get bored with this because I am very much into neutral looks these days, especially lately because my No Pan Left Behind wheel has been dealing me neutral palette after neutral palette after neutral palette. Regardless, this is one of my very favorite palettes and I'm, you know, it's on the list. It's on the short list for a hypothetical and that palette. Next, if you've been around on my channel for a while, this will be no surprise to you. The second palette that I would consider as a pan matte palette would be my Persona Identity palette. The fact that it's in this original packaging and not the plastic packaging would indicate how old this palette is. It is very old, I think around 5 years old. I do have one pan in here in the shade Seductive. But the reason, of course, that I've included this in this roundup of possibilities, this is one of my favorite palettes. I've had it for years. It's been always at the top of any roundup of eyeshadow palettes that I have done. It is just a favorite. The mattes are good, not my 100% favorite formula, but the shimmers are absolutely one of my favorite formulas. My favorite shade in this palette is this one right here, which is called Bombshell. And to me, it's like a goldy, grungy green. I do have dips in a lot of the shades, as you should be able to see here and in the B-roll footage, which would be helpful. But also, it's one of my oldest palettes, and it is definitely the oldest palette in this roundup. But I do want to say, I think the one thing that would be a con about this one is that most of the shades in here, and especially the mattes, are a mid to dark range, which would cause me to reach into other palettes and therefore kind of reduce my progress on this palette. So that is the one drawback, I think, to this palette. And also, it is getting older. Some of the shades are a little harder to work with, specifically the matte shades. So I don't know that I would choose this as my pan matte palette, but if I did, I would really enjoy the looks. Next is a little palette that I just love and I travel with, and I'm always happy with the looks when I use it, and that is my Charlotte Tilbury Super Nudes palette. This is a palette of 6 satin eyeshadows, and they range from warm to cool. These 3 right here is one of my favorite everyday looks. I do this lightest shade all over the lid, the next deepest shade in the crease, and then this purpley shade in the outer corner or as a liner, and call it a day. Maybe even the ivory shade on the inner corner. And like I said, these are all satin, so they're soft. They have a sheen or a luminous quality to them, but they're not shimmers by any stretch of the imagination. And then you have this beautiful gray taupe shade and a black. And the other thing that's great about this palette is that it's great on its own, but it's also great paired with other palettes. And that is certainly something that I think would help me work toward using this one up or hitting pan on all of the shades. The one con, I think, for this palette is that there is a black shade in there. I would most likely not be able to hit pan on that one unless I really committed to having like a black liner every day on the upper lash line or something like that. I do like the idea that it's small and that I love every single shade in here, including the black. When I went to Billy Idol in Vegas, I did a look with these four here. I did this in the crease, like transition and crease, this on the outer corner, this on the lid, and this like a winged liner. And it was absolutely amazing. I wish I had a picture of it, but I don't think I do. Next is one that I think might surprise some people, but it is a palette that I enjoy very much, and it's half of a duo of palettes that I bought at holiday time. I think it was 2022 holiday, and that is the Tarte Glamour palette. There's also the Gilded palette that has the more warm red, yellow, orange kind of shades in it, but this one is a little bit more on the neutral side in terms of the colors in. And that's one of the things that I like about this palette. It has just enough color to be interesting and fun to play around with, but it also has enough neutral in it that I think that it would be wearable for every day most of the time. And I also really enjoy that this is exactly half matte and half shimmer. I love the shades in here. The only downside I can see to this is that the mattes are very firmly pressed in here. I mean, this shade right here, which is called Deco, which is like a perfect transition shade for me, I've used it dozens of times and there's barely a dip in it. So that would definitely be a little bit of a con towards a pan that palette. But in terms of interest and the colors and everything in it, I do think this would be a lot of fun to work on panning. There's some shades in here that would definitely push me a little bit. And lastly is a palette that I actually have a couple of pans in and that I still really enjoy, and that is my ABH Norvina palette. And funnily enough, this did just get rolled into my No Pan Left Behind series, so I'm really excited about using it again in its entirety and playing with it. So you can see here I do have 3 pans in these 2 shades and then in this shade over here. One thing in favor of this palette is that it already has 3 pans in it, and so that gives me a little bit of a head start versus like none of the other ones except for the Persona has 1 pan in it. So that's a great help in the right direction, as well as this is half matte and half shimmer, which I absolutely love. It gives me lots of choices for shimmers, but also lots of choices for mattes for setting up looks. For those of you who have an ABH palette like this, you probably already know that the shimmers are quite easy to hit pan in. They're very soft. It's very easy to disturb those shadows and get down to the pans pretty quickly. And then I also love that there's a beautiful range from light to dark in this palette, which also makes it very usable to create the kind of looks that I'm creating on a daily basis. I'm setting things up, I'm deepening things up, and then maybe even adding a little bit of drama. And for me, this was one of the harder palettes to find a con on. The only one I could really come up with is I don't love this shade Eccentric right here. It's kind of a yellowy orange. I do think I could do it. I could make progress. I could hit pan on it, just pairing it with some of the other shades and using it at just the right time of year for it to not take away from my skin tone, but, you know, make it even more beautiful. So I do love this palette. It would be an easy one for me, I think, to work on hitting pan on. So ultimately, if I had to pick 2, it would be the Natasha Denona Glam palette and the ABH Norvina palette. But from there, I don't know. The Norvina palette would offer a lot more in terms of color. This is completely neutral. However, that being said, on most days I am creating neutral looks because I just do. I love neutral looks, and especially as I get older, I seem to like them more and more. But in the end, I don't have to choose because I'm not doing a Pan That palette this year, but I do think these would all be great palettes to keep in consideration for that, or for the future if I do decide to do a Pan That palette next year. Or here's another idea. I could myself make the choice for my next Project Level Up palette. My Pretty Grunge palette is currently in for level 1, but maybe I can make my own choice versus rolling randomly and roll one of these in for the next level. Let me know if you would like to see that and which one you'd like to see. If you were choosing for me, would you pick the Natasha Denona Glam palette, or would you pick the ABH Norvina palette, and why? And also, if you're doing a Pan That palette this year, let us know down in the comments below what palette you're panning this year, or if you aren't and you were going to do a Pan That palette, what palette would you pick? Clear as mud? Probably. So that is it for today's video. I just thought this would be not only a fun little exercise for me to dig into my eyeshadow collection, and believe me, I did. I sat here with my desk drawer, which is where all of my palettes are. I sat here with my desk drawer open for probably an hour, just sitting here swatching, weighing, measuring, and all of the things, and really taking this exercise somewhat seriously to bring to you guys the kind of information that might be helpful for you, the different reasons why I thought these palettes might be a good choice. And hopefully you got something out of the video. It was really fun to film, and I'm glad I got to share this look with you because I definitely don't glam like this even on a weekly basis. Not that you shouldn't, I just don't. But today I felt like getting glam and wearing my favorite red lipstick. I hope you're having a great day so far. Thank you so much for hanging out with me while I babble about eyeshadow. And with all of that said, I hope all of your makeup days are absolutely beautiful, glam eyeshadow days. And I will see you in my next video very, very soon.